Someone once said that in life, you're either in a problem, you just left one, or you're headed towards one. And that life is like the waves of an ocean, that you get the occasional problems that occur regularly, and then you get the occasional crisis. So life occurs in such a way that you have problems, and then the occasional crisis. And I want to talk to you for the next few minutes about how to handle a crisis. If there's one thing that we both share in common, is the fact that we would all experience change. And in many cases, change is not something that we often like, especially if the outcomes and the experience of change isn't pleasing. But one of the things that we know that is constant in life is that there will be change. And so one of the things you and I have to learn how to do is how to welcome change, how not to resist change, but more importantly, how to get the best out of change. I remember someone once saying something that goes like this, that in times of change, the learners will inherit the earth, whilst the learned will be fully equipped to deal with a world that no longer exists. Alvin Toffler was the one who said that. And in that statement, or that quote, is a powerful insight as to how you and I have to adapt. Now, crisis usually occurs when we refuse change. Now, think about this. Think about your life. Look back maybe the last few years, maybe the last few months, and think about when you have experienced a crisis, what you may have considered to be perhaps a challenging experience. One of the things you'll find out is that nature, life, whatever you believe in, God, infinite intelligence, was perhaps trying to get you to grow, perhaps trying to get you to move on, perhaps trying to get you to let go, or perhaps trying to remind you that you've been neglecting some of the necessary changes that you should have made. And in many cases, a crisis is simply when you get into more like a head-on collision, an impact whereby something has to change immediately. You've perhaps gone past the stage whereby you could make gradual changes, or perhaps you've gone past the stage where you had the power of choice. And in this case, nature has made a choice for you, and you have to adapt to the change. And that's what I want to talk about. In a very interesting way, we all react to circumstances and experiences differently. The first thing that I'll tell you is this. You've got to learn how to respond and not react to a crisis. Two different words, very subtle, very simple. But you see, when you respond to things that happen from external or circumstances or even people, when you respond, you're in control. When you react, the external circumstance, the event, the person is in control. Another distinction is this. When you respond, you're normally coming from a place of peace and calmness, perhaps introspection. You're thinking. And that's the key word. When you respond, you're coming from a place whereby you're in control. You're using your thoughts constructively. When you react, it's usually emotive. It's very emotional. Perhaps it's reactive. Perhaps in many cases, it's a little bit defensive. Perhaps you're trying to stop what's trying to happen naturally from happening. And so the first part of dealing with a crisis is learning how to respond and not react to life. Bruce Lee was one of the ones who said that the best martial artists were those who could flow and those who could stay relaxed until the point of impact. So if you were going to punch or you were going to kick in martial arts, I should say, you kept your body very calm. You didn't want to tense your body. And that is what most of us really struggle to do. We're normally very tensed. So when things happen, we're reacting. We're using so much energy. Whereas if you're responding, you're simply taking the energy from the environment, from the person, from the circumstances, and you're simply deflecting it in a very easy way and you're not using any of your energy. So the first thing is learn how to respond and not react. Very simple. Now the next step that I would say is sit down and capture, perhaps in writing, what the crisis is. Many times when things happen to us, because we're usually working off the memory of what we have about the experience or the person or the circumstance, sometimes we over-exaggerate. Now, you may have heard little kids, maybe you have kids yourself, or you may have heard little kids use the statement, "Why are you making this such a big deal?" Little kids sometimes tend to remind adults that it's not that big a deal. It's not that big a deal. You're overreacting. And one of the things you and I have to do is get things in perspective. It all comes down to perspective. One of the faculties we have of the mind is what we call perception. And that helps us to see things. It gives us a perspective about things. In many cases, what we think is a crisis has to be put in perspective. By putting things in perspective, I'm not suggesting that you assume that what's happening to you is not important, because you see, everyone's experience is relative. But one of the things that I find helpful in my case is to take what has just happened that I consider to be a crisis and compare it to something else. So perhaps your car has just broke down and you can't get to work. To you, that might be a crisis at that particular point. However, by choosing to put it in perspective and say, well, I could have been in an accident. What if I was in an accident and I lost a limb? What if I was in an accident and I was paralyzed? By putting things in perspective, one of the things you find is that it helps you to segregate and see things clearly, whereby you then realize it's not that big a deal, that you're over blowing things out of proportion. In an interesting way, it helps you come back to the reality of what's important. So the second step that I would say is, once you've decided to respond, put things in perspective. Capture what has just happened, your crisis, in writing. And one of the reasons you want to capture it in writing is because so you know exactly what you're dealing with. There's an interesting statement about the power of perception and reality. The mind is a powerful organ. I shouldn't use the word organ because no one has actually ever seen the mind. But the mind is one of the most powerful forces in the world. We all have a mind. One of the functions of our mind is it has this ability to expand an experience or contract an experience. And you and I have to use that ability and that function of the mind for our purpose. Now think about this. Let's say, for example, you are worried. You're worried that perhaps a loved one is at risk. Maybe you haven't heard from them for a few hours. Your mind has a way of taking a thought and magnifying that thought to the point whereby you're imagining all possible scenarios occurring, which in many cases are negative. Now the reality is, if that experience did happen, the reality of you having experienced it in real time is not as severe as what your mind does to you by maximizing the perceived experience. So perception is something that you and I have to really get hold of. We've got to control how we use our mind. First, choose to respond. Next, capture the crisis in writing so that you can put it in perspective, and then use the function of your mind to decide as to whether you can shrink the experience such that it's not taking up I would say, a significant part of your thoughts and your feelings, so it serves you. Now, once you've captured the crisis in writing, this is what I usually suggest. Brian Tracy has a statement that I like. He said, at the end of every day, you should ask yourself 2 questions. What did I do right? What could I have done differently? Now, in that statement is the power of reflection, introspection. You see, many of us go through crisis because we fail to sit down at the end of every day and review what we could have done differently. You see, life is like an exam. Let me change that statement. Forgive me for using the word exam. That's perhaps not the best metaphor because it would mean you either fail or you pass. But life is like an adventure. As part of the adventure, you go through certain phases. When you go through those phases in life, you're expected to learn certain things from your experiences. Life brings to you experiences. Your responsibility is to choose and take out what is important from those experiences, because those experiences become wisdom. Knowledge based on your experience and having been applied becomes wisdom. And later on during the journey in the jungle, or part of your adventure, that wisdom you have will help you navigate through life, navigate through the journey, so that should you come across something similar, you can say, I've experienced this before, and the way I overcame, or what I should have done, should have been this. That way, you don't repeat the same mistakes you're making every day, every month, every year. And so for many of us, a crisis is simply mistakes we've made over and over and over again. And life has come to the point where it said, you've got to change. I've given you so much time, but now you really have to change. So one of the things you have to do when you've captured your crisis experience or the circumstance in writing, one of the things you have to do is formulate a strategy. Just look back, just review and say, knowing what I know now, what would I have done differently should this happen again? Now, at the moment when you're actually asking yourself that question, something unique and interesting is happening. And that is, your creativity is at the highest point or highest level in moments of crisis. It kind of feels weird, but naturally we human beings, when we have comfort around us, comfort diminishes desire, comfort diminishes creativity, comfort diminishes ambition. Not for everyone, but in general. However, when we're put in a position whereby we have some pressure, a little bit of stress, problems, crisis, one of the things we start to do is we start to use our reasoning faculty. We start to think. And when we start to think, we start to come up with ideas. And those ideas present us with opportunities that help us navigate our problems. Think about this. Everything you see around you today that is tangible started because someone came up with an idea that could solve a problem. So in many ways, problems and crises sometimes are gifts. I normally say that they come as packaged gifts. You have to unwrap the problem to see the opportunity that lies within. Danger and opportunity often come together. Whatever you focus on, that's what you're going to get in experience. So one of the things you have to do is sit down and ask yourself the question, knowing what I know now, if I look back, what could I have done differently? And the key point here is this: you want to capture in writing what you could have done differently. Here is one of the most important bits of information I'm going to leave with you. Whenever you had a failure, or if you had a crisis, or if you had problems, if you begin with the end in mind and play backwards and ask yourself, what could I have done differently? One of the things you find is when you review what you could have done differently and you capture it in writing, you look at the feedback you've gotten, you ask yourself, okay, with that information, what will I do next time to ensure that it works? What you find is failure is simply a success equation in reverse. Think about this. You've taken a few steps, and at the end, the outcome is not what you expected. You begin with the end in mind and ask yourself, okay, this is the result I have. What could I have done to have changed this result so that I would conform with what I wanted? So you start thinking creatively. Maybe you ask questions to really intelligent people, people who could advise you. You capture all of the feedback. You capture all of your thought process. You document it. If you put that in reverse, what you find, that's the success equation. So whenever there is a crisis, it's a learning experience. You have to capture what you could have done differently. Now, once you've done that, you find that you still haven't dealt with the crisis. It's still there. What we're trying to do here is capture when we have your what I call your creative juices flowing. So you want to capture all of that. Once you've done that, the question is then, how do I deal with a crisis? And here is what I will share with you. In many cases, whenever we have a crisis, our thoughts dominate how we think. Our thoughts dominate how we feel. And in many cases, we tend to focus on the negative than the positive. So whenever you have a crisis, 95%, and even more, if I could say, maybe 96% of your energy, of your focus should be directed at finding a solution. 3%, maybe 5% should be focused on the problem. What you don't want to do is disregard the problem completely and go running like a headless chicken trying to find a solution. No, this is the reason why I said capture the crisis in writing. Spend 3 to 5% of your time, of your energy, of your efforts, of your focus, of your resources on the problem. 97%, between 95 and 97%, should be spent on the solution. And that simply means what you want in that instant. You've captured everything in writing, you've captured what you could have done differently. You want to change your focus. See, whatever you focus on, you attract. The law of attraction works. But the law of attraction, most people don't understand this, is preceded by a different law. It's called the law of expectation. I'm not suggesting that you're expecting another crisis, but this is how it works. Let me share with you what I call the chronology of outcomes in life. What you see with your natural eyes, or with your imagination, with your mind's eye, decides the thoughts you have. Likewise, what you hear decides the thoughts you have. What's around you, the influence you have around your environment, plays an impact as well. Now, your thoughts, when repeated continuously with emotion, whether fear or faith, those emotionalized thoughts are expressed as feelings. Your feelings determine your actions. Your actions will determine the results you have. Sometimes, if you repeat it over a long period of time, those actions become habits. Those habits become conditions. Conditioned into you, they become paradigms. They become part of your character and your behavior, and they influence your results. So one of the most important things you have to do is choose your focus. And this is the reason why I said 95 to 97% of your focus, your thoughts, should be on solutions. 3 to 5% on the problem. Now, this simply means that in addition to you thinking, you want to surround yourself with people who can help you solve the problem. You don't want to surround yourself with people who are going to ask you what you did wrong. You want people who can say, we have a problem, this is how we're going to fix it. And what you should try to do in every crisis is never work with your mind alone. Never work with one mind alone. Someone once said, where 2 or 3 people gather and have the same common purpose, that the strength of their agreement would determine the level of their success. The best thing you can do for yourself in a crisis is reach out to someone or a group of people who can help you. But you want to limit the number of people you invite to help you, for the simple reason that when you have too many solutions, it becomes difficult to choose the right ones. What you want is to invite 1 or 2 people who you know have had the experience of dealing with crises of that type, people who you know perhaps will support you and will not be judgmental, but also people who you know are problem solvers. And what you want to do is brainstorm, if you can. Perhaps think about your solutions on your own first and then reach out to them so that you're making the decisions yourself. One of the things you and I have to learn how to do is how not to delegate to the point of abdication. If there's a crisis in your life, it's your responsibility. It's not for you to delegate to the point of abdication. What you want to do is welcome good ideas, but be the one who makes the decision. And so I think the first thing you have to do is decide for yourself what you believe the solutions might be, and then welcome other ideas. And when you've done this, it's about choosing the best solutions. It's not about who came up with the idea. It's not about who perhaps has the smartest perhaps strategy. It's about what works. If the ideas you've come up with yourself are not sufficient to achieve the desired results, let it go. Discard it. Find ideas that work. And in many cases, this is where I find most people struggle. In many cases, most people remain in crisis simply because they're too proud. They're too proud. They lack humility. The humility in saying, I don't know, or what I know is insufficient, and I'm going to reach out to someone who knows more than I do. I believe in everyone's experience in everyone's life within perhaps I might say maybe 200 or 300 yards from wherever you might be, there's a solution to your crisis or to your problem. It's in a book, it's in someone's mind, but it's somewhere. You have to be a detective. You have to go finding, go searching for where those answers are. And when you find good answers, don't be arrogant. Be humble. If it works, then work it. Apply it, and then course correct. Quite simple. Now, let me summarize very quickly by saying this. One of the challenges that we have is that we never sit down to reflect. I know this sounds rather strange, but think about this. From my experience, I've found that whenever I've gone through a crisis, I'm so eager to move on that it does something. Unfortunately, because I don't sit down and review everything that has gone on and the changes that I had to make and the learning experiences that I had to make, what I tend to find, because I'm so in a hurry to move away from that experience, I end up not taking the gem of wisdom contained in the experience. In every crisis, in every problem, in every challenge we have in life, I believe that there are usually about 3 or 4 unique, what I call blessings, what I call opportunities, what I call gifts. You have to go searching to find out which are the gifts for you. And so in many cases, you solve the problem, but because you're in a hurry to get away, you leave without collecting your gems, the 3, 4, 5 gems in that experience. And therefore, you move to the next phase of your life, poorer, both intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, even mentally, than you were before you started the experience. And in many cases, I might even say physically, because in many cases, the gems that you pick up, when reapplied in the right way, you find that there is a unique way that it can provide prosperity and good fortune and good health and better relationships, more happiness, more wealth to your life. So let me conclude by saying this. In a crisis, recognize that change is one of the constants where we will all experience. Welcome it. I know people do not naturally resist change, and this is where crisis comes in. It's not that you and I resist change, it's the fact that we resist being changed. And the crisis forces us to change. So number 1, learn to respond. Don't react. Number 2, capture your crisis in writing, document it, put it in writing so that you can take it away from your mind. The sharpest mind is not as efficient as the bluntest pencil. Let me put it the other way. The bluntest pencil or the bluntest pen is better than the sharpest mind. Your mind is not for storage. Your mind is to create, to dream, to think, to come up with great ideas. So take it away from your mind so that your mind doesn't keep expanding the experience and blowing it out of proportion. So capture it in writing. Once you've done that, go through a brainstorming session, both with yourself and with maybe a mastermind group, and capture ideas and ways in which you can solve the problem. Once you've done that, focus on solutions and less on the problems, and take action. You found a solution that works, put it to work. Once you put it to work and you solve the problem, sit down and review the entire process. Both what you could have done differently, the experience you had, the feedback you received, maybe from good people. Capture it in writing, because this is what I call gems of life. This is what I call principles. Imagine how your life would change if you captured all of the principles that helped you navigate through the challenges of life. You captured it perhaps in a journal, and you shared that journal with other people. So, because you see, in life, problems are not designed for a selected group of people. You and I might experience similar problems. If you've overcome a problem and I could get your principles and I can use your principles when I experience my problem, it means that my experience of my problems do not overwhelm me. So one of the most important things you have to do is capture in writing your principles. Those perhaps ideas and steps that you took to solve a potential crisis, or perhaps a crisis in itself. And once you've done all of that, celebrate. Find a way to celebrate. Celebrate simply means that you reward yourself for what you've done. Growth is usually the byproduct of a crisis if done right. I'll say that again. If you go through a crisis and you follow the steps that we've talked about so far, and you've learned, you've listened, you've applied good knowledge, you've captured the gems of wisdom, captured the gems of life, what you find is that you grow. And growth is one of the keys to a fulfilled life. I hope that's been useful. I wish you